All right, so this is my favorite seaweed. This is Mikabu. That's the ruffled part. This is upside down, so that's where all the sporophyll is. So it's the reproductively active part of the seaweed. It has the most, I think, biologically active components. So in traditional Chinese medicine, seaweed was used to treat hard swellings, so probably cancer. In Japanese folk medicine, extracts are used to treat cancer. In Ayurvedic medicine, seaweed is also used. So I began in this journey wondering what doctors had missed about breast cancer. So I read Lancet Between when it began in 1824. It actually began in 1822, but the oldest volume in the shelves of Harvard Medical Library was 1824. It had a great advantage in that the articles are short and anybody can write a letter. So I read a lot of these, just indexing, reading articles, but it wasn't until I reached the 1956 volume that I came across this letter from a general practitioner who said that the ancient Egyptians had used seaweed to treat breast cancer, and he thought it was due to iodine. Oh, it had also been described as in the Smith's surgical papyrus about 2000, so that would be 17, anyway, a long time ago, thousands of years ago. It was recorded that seaweed was used to treat breast tumors. I have to say that salty vegetable has never been translated. So it's just a guess that it's the seaweed, and probably because it was seaweed and it had high iodine, it was used topically to treat infections. It might have been breast cancer, it might have not been. But in any case, that set me off on a 40-some year journey to study seaweed. 230 million people in Japan and Korea eat seaweed every day, or at least many times a week. And this is a typical meal. Actually, this was a breakfast when I was in Japan. And they have lower cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. And they like a variety of seaweed. So I was interested primarily in breast cancer because you got to focus on something. So if you look at this bottom line, that's Japan, and at age 45, about menopause, women in Japan, some women still get breast cancer, but their rates actually go down. France and the UK, at menopause, there's a little bleep, and then it starts to increase exponentially all the way to age 80. Spain is an outlier. It could have something to do, they eat a lot of lentil soup, and lentils are known to have anti-cancer properties. But I was primarily interested in Japan. So this was a study done of women living in Japan. So very few women in Japan get breast cancer. If they move to the US and they're here for 10 years, it almost doubles, and it almost triples if they live here more than 10 years. If they're US born Japanese, it's more than double. And then for non-Japanese, it's almost 4.5 times higher. So where you're born and who your parents are is important. Hippocrates said that all disease begins in the gut, and that's where your microbiome is. And so it wasn't my initial focus. I just wanted to look at rates of breast cancer. But your microbiome has about 1 trillion critters in it: bacteria, viruses, old forms of bacteria. I mean, it's really quite incredible. And if you look at the diversity, this is people moving, I think that's a map of Asia. And when they first get to the US, their microbiome, this is taking fecal samples and looking at it, you know, it's not quite as diverse when they first get here. And then long-term residents, it gets less diverse. By the second generation, it's a whole lot less diverse than when they were living in Asia. And European Americans have even less diversity. So there was something really good about not migrating. And it could well do with our diet. The average American eats seaweed 10 times a day, or consumes seaweed. It's an emulsifier. It's in yogurt and ice cream, chocolate milk, toothpaste. It's used in the process of making beer. Often it's called carrageenan or alginate. And it's probably not enough to do any good, but we do consume seaweed daily, and most people have no idea. There's a real yuck factor about seaweed in America. It's probably even in corn dogs. So when I began, I wanted to make sure I got real seaweed I could go back to. I wanted to use it in a rat study where there were no cultural variables. And so Larry Cushy shared an office with the man who I subsequently married, James Hebert. And Larry helped me get in contact with Ravi Swinnerton of the Mitoku company in Japan, and he identified a specific place I could get kombu. And he shipped it to me, and I began work. So this was the first study I did, and I gave 5% of rat chow. It was sort of incorporated into the rat chow, so they couldn't avoid the seaweed. I think they actually liked the seaweed, but I wanted to make sure it really was being consumed. The iodine content of that kind of seaweed, unprocessed, just straight from the seashore, was very high. It would be higher than would be allowed in an American supplement. What was interesting, so I did my study in 84, and it was, you know, it was okay. So 50% of the rats developed cancer by 110 days, and it was over here 75% had developed cancer, or 50% of the rats had developed cancer by 75 days of age. So this was 17 years later. Science moves very slowly. So these people, Funahashi, gave the same carcinogen, but 4 times as much as I had given. And they used the sporophyll, the part I showed at the very beginning, that had been soaked in cool water for 24 hours. And then the water had been triple filtered. So this was only whatever is very, very, very small ended up in that drinking water. And you can see almost none of the rats developed cancer, even 30 weeks after getting this carcinogen. And almost 100% of the rats had developed cancer by 10 weeks. So this was pretty amazing. And Undaria mikabu has very low iodine. So that was a really positive thing. And it's a hot water extract. This is miso soup. Many people in Japan have miso soup with every meal. Most people have it at least once a day. I did a study in people because I really didn't like killing these poor old rats, and I didn't kill any of the people either. But this is one of the hormones most associated with breast cancer. So there was a definite dose decrease in Estradiol E2 with more seaweed. And so looking at it for an average Japanese sized woman, 54 kilos, it would be 3.8 grams per day, which is estimated to be about what people in Japan do consume. Women in America, way more, and that would be about 5.3 grams a day to get the same effect. So it's biologically plausible that seaweed is important and part of the Japanese diet that protects women in Japan. This was interesting because it's not only the brown seaweeds. Nori is actually technically a red seaweed. And this is the number of, well, it's an odds ratio, so 100% of the breast cancer patients, but if they ate seaweed, especially the postmenopausal women, had about a third of the rate of breast cancer. So there's something protective about this very, very old form of life, seaweed, both red and brown, and probably green too. So the postulated effect is that seaweeds have a form of fiber classified as a prebiotic, and it doesn't get broken down in the stomach or the small intestine. It reaches the colon, and there it is fermented by the beneficial bacteria in your colon, and it produces what's called postbiotics, the short-chain fatty acids that are very protective against cancer. So this prebiotics weren't formally identified until 1995. Everybody sort of lumped fiber in one group and said, fiber is important, you should eat fiber. And it's often advertised in our cereals, breakfast cereals, as high fiber. But in America, the actual consumption of fiber has stayed pretty stable at 15 grams per person per day since, at least when I started counting them, since 1999. And in 2010, it was still about the same. What we want to aim for is almost double that. And so the breakfast cereal and all the pro-fiber advertising really hasn't made a dent in our consumption of fiber. For some reason, purified, refined, ultra-processed food just is killing us. A tablespoon of ground up dried seaweed would add 3 grams of fiber to the diet. So it's not very much fiber, but it is a special form of fiber. Excuse me. And we really don't get much of this kind of fiber. Well, modern life in general is a problem that if you have, this is just sort of a metaphor for the colon. If you have this depleted colon down here with not very many good guys, no matter how much seaweed you eat, it probably won't help. But if you have lots of good guys, and the seaweed is going to help the best of them grow, that's what you want. But there is this balance. If you don't consume the right food, and Macrobiotics actually does produce, usually people who follow a macrobiotic diet eat the right food. So it is a very positive indication macrobiotics is healthy. But there are lifestyle things that get in the way. If someone is a very clean person and they use, it's over 200 different products in America that have Triclosan, and just washing your hands with one of these, or brushing your teeth, or washing your face, washing your floor, your dishes, any of these, toothpaste, lipstick, deodorant. I mean, it's sort of everywhere. Interestingly, in Europe, Triclosan is banned, but not in America. We also ingest more antibiotics in America. I mean, this is the very top, and Japan's not on here, but compared to Norway, we're way higher. And most of it goes to our farm animals, some to patients and some to pets. But most of it, we don't even know we're getting antibiotics, especially if you eat conventional meats. You probably have a high intake of antibiotics that are depleting the bacteria, the good bacteria, and possibly the bad bacteria in your colon. So these are two really important ways our lifestyle is just not adaptive to good microbiomes. So what we have to do, like Horton the elephant, we have to hear what's important and protect it. These are three of the major colors of seaweed. There are four different colors. They're brown, green, red, and then there are a few golden seaweeds around. They aren't generally eaten, but the browns are the most common, the kelps, then the dulse, the nori are red seaweeds, and then some green seaweeds are eaten commonly in Japan. So here's an estimate that 85% of the seaweed eaten in Japan is brown seaweed. 13% is red seaweed, the dulse, the sushi wrappers, and 2% is the green. So, if I were designing a supplement, I think I would want all three kinds of seaweed in a supplement, a whole seaweed supplement, because I think they're probably all beneficial, and they probably work with each other. So what's not to like about seaweed? It has a great umami flavor. It expands 20% in volume in water or in your digestive fluids. It increases bulk feelings of fullness and satiety, so it has low calories. It's slippery, non-digestible fiber. It speeds transit time, and constipation and bloating is common in America. And it also binds, it's negatively charged, and it binds toxins and carcinogens as in the gut that are accidentally, consumed, and they're eliminated. I mean, seaweeds are really great food. there's, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and seaweed is only one part of a healthy lifestyle. Eating whole foods, organic, unprocessed, drinking enough water, sleeping enough, exercise, spending time with friends. And a Rinpoche I know said that making one other person happy a day should be the goal of everyone, and then we could change the entire world. But they all have to be done together, and it's not enough to take your average person and say, here, eat this seaweed. It will save you from all these diseases. It's a whole, possibly macrobiotic approach to life that has to happen. Seaweed continues. This is in Argentina, and this is what the seaweed looks like cast upon the shore and being held upside down. And this is where I got the seaweed I used in the human trials, was from Argentina. These are all the people that supported me over all these years, and to them I am grateful. And that's some of what I know, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions. Now, stop share. Ha.
Great.
Oh. Anyone? Let's see.
Jane, I wonder how seaweed fits for you personally in your diet. Do you enjoy it? Do you consume it?
I love using there's a great seasoning with 3 different kinds of seaweed. Franny in Ireland has put this together. She's a cardiologist, I guess, a GP with an interest in heart health. And I put it on vegetables if I roast them. I mean, it's a great flavor. Whenever I cook beans, I add kombu, and I like a whole big strip of kombu. I know that seaweed, when Macrobiotics was first sort of formed, it was 6 inches of seaweed a day, and it got smaller and smaller, possibly because of my research saying that iodine was dangerous. It got to be the size of a postage stamp. I don't think that's enough. I think you need at least what would be a tablespoon of dried seaweed. I also take seaweed supplements every day, 5 grams of seaweed a day in supplements. They have just changed the formulation, so it's no longer whole seaweed. It's this seaweed extract. So they soak it in water, and then whatever is in the water, they dry it, and they put that in a capsule. I have no idea if there's anything useful in that formulation. They don't provide any guidance. It's from a place called Piping Rock. I have no idea where the seaweed comes from. They say it's Undaria. I know that seaweed grows really well in polluted water. I have no idea where this seaweed comes from, and nobody claims it's from the pristine waters of New Zealand or Argentina. So it's a best guess that this is a good thing to do, but I cannot say I know anything more.
So what are the kinds of seaweeds that you think are most beneficial for cancer prevention and reversing?
I would say mainly the brown seaweeds.
Which ones are
so
those?
the kelp, the kombu, the mikabu, wakame. There are about 14 different commonly eaten seaweeds in Japan. We only import some of them. So in an Oriental market, you could get, or a health food store, it's easy to get kombu. Sometimes you can get wakame, and occasionally you can get mikabu, which are the sporophylls. You can get them online. Seaweed harvesters generally don't give a lot of information about where their seaweed is grown. That was why it was important for me to go work with Larry Cushy and find where that seaweed was coming from. And it was cold water. It grows best in cold water. The red seaweeds, you know, you can get great red seaweeds from Maine Coast Sea Vegetables, and Larch Hansen's seaweed. Those seaweeds, I've harvested seaweed with larch, and those seaweeds come from very pristine waters off the coast of Maine. I would say that Larch Hansen's are more carefully collected because he has a smaller clientele, and he probably knows exactly which rock he goes to. So it's a bit, Maine Coast Sea Vegetables is a bigger operation, and they have many harvesters, but it's still from Maine, so it's good seaweed.
Jane?
Yeah.
Hi. Your research is so incredibly great. Thank you. And I've seen you speak, and I actually am so happy you're here. So I just wanted to, I'm wondering about the iodine thing. And I know for breast cancer, it's helpful that the iodine and the thyroid, I'm wondering why. Maybe I just don't know on the amount, because if you're from the United States and you're not used to having as much as they have in Japan and Korea, maybe we have to have a smaller dose. And so I don't know if you have any, I can't crystallize one question, but if you have any sort of thoughts on, if you can figure it out and comment, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Seaweed loses iodine easily. So even just being stored in a plastic bag, it will aerosolize and crystallize in the bag. If you wash it, if you cook it, if you boil it, iodine will go in the air. It's very hard to know at what point to measure the iodine. So you lose about 75% of the iodine just from the point of harvest to when you might have it on your table. So in my estimation, iodine really is not a problem. There are some few people for whom iodine is a problem. And the first thing that happens is called a thyroid storm, and your thyroid shuts down. And for about 3 days, it just shuts down, and then it starts to function again. And it seemed to me that the worst possible seaweed consumers were the weekend warriors, the ones who would eat seaweed over brown rice on Saturday and not again until the following Saturday. So half that week would be in thyroid storm if they were sensitive, and then they would start again. So I think consistency is important. Certainly there are people who are sensitive, but for the vast majority of people, I think iodine is just being commonly exposed to the iodine. Your thyroid works with it, and it's really not very important. The iodine that they measure is potassium iodide, and it's about 100% is absorbed from the stomach. Seaweed has iodine that's caught in that prebiotic fiber. It really doesn't get digested or released until it reaches the colon. So although I have searched high and low, I have never found exactly where the iodine in the colon goes that is different than the iodine absorbed from the stomach. My feeling is that it is different. It has a different circulation pattern, different targets. So I know that Norway is very, very concerned about iodine, and they're trying to ban it from dietary supplements in Norway.
Yeah.
I think the good it does is far outweighs the harm, but regulators like to go for the most sensitive population to protect them. I think, in 20 years, maybe they'll change and say, well, it'll benefit 99% of our population. We should allow people to eat it. But at the moment, they're trying to be very, very conservative, and it's philosophical. I just don't think it's a good approach, but that's what they're doing.
Would you say, so I'm a dietitian, and I like to tell people to use seaweed and veg and beans. I say 1 or 2 stamp sizes and then if they're having miso soup or, seaweed salad or something, just, I say, don't overdo it, because you should have it. It's really good for you, but just to be, I know that sometimes if you overdo it, your thyroid stimulating hormone might react. I suspect it's all adapting, but so those amounts sound kind of safe, you think? A couple of tablespoons here and a couple of tablespoons there. I mean, stamp sizes.
It would take 16 cups of nori to reach your maximum allowable dose of iodine. There are some seaweeds where it would take 1/4 of a teaspoon.
Like
so the
kombu?
brown seaweeds are very high in iodine, but you can have kombu growing next to nori, and 6 inches apart, one concentrates iodine, the other does not.
Okay.
I think a postage stamp is too low
Okay.
for the benefits of seaweed. But there is the problem of consistency. You want it to be consistent. When I did the study of 40 healthy postmenopausal women, which are in a different PowerPoint, the TSH did not go up with seaweed, and I gave 5 grams a day.
What does 5 grams translate to, like kombu
tablespoon.
or wakame?
1 tablespoon.
Okay, crushed.
Dried. Yeah.
I'll have to try that. Thank you.
So I can, if you email me, I can send you the studies I did.
Thank you.
Yep.
So awesome. Can maybe someone post that in the text, in the chat?
Oh, it's at the very top of my, oh, that's not a good email. So it's JaneCheese11 @gmail.
Thank you. Thank you for all of this.
Oh,
Can you
pleasure.
say your email again?
I just wrote it down for you in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
There's a question about, are there certain companies selling seaweeds that are better than others? I will tell you about, I've been going to seaweed conferences for over 20 years. And for the elite, I've never gone to one of these breakfasts, but they have the liar's breakfast. And it's because everyone knows, who deals with huge amounts of seaweed, that everyone lies about where their seaweed comes from. And it's just a fact of seaweed seaweed harvesters have dealt with seaweed for hair tonics, for things that have nothing to do with medicine, and it was never really important, but they had images of where they got their seaweed. So the reason I got seaweed in Argentina was that a man came to visit me in South Carolina from Hobart, Australia. That's the little island off the coast of Australia. And he said, use our seaweed. So I said, okay, I'll investigate it. It was Undaria. I like Undaria. But then there was climate change, and the seaweed from Hobart no longer was growing there. Seaweed goes in waves. You can have an oil spill and it'll kill all the seaweed. So they bought their seaweed from Argentina. So I said, there's no point in buying it from Hobart. I can go off to Argentina and buy it directly. I'm not sure. I've been to this very remote place called Bustamante. And both times I went in anticipation of watching them harvest seaweed. The last slide of Gonzalo holding up the seaweed, the Undaria. For some reason, they weren't harvesting the days I was there, even though I'd been promised I would be able to see them harvest the seaweed. So I know there's seaweed that grows there. 2 hours north, there's no seaweed because there was an oil spill. There was an oil spill at some time in Bustamante. I have no idea where that seaweed comes from. I know off the coast of Maine, I personally went out there with Larch Henson and we collected that seaweed, and I sent it to be ground and put into the capsules. Alaria is the seaweed I used, and it's available from both Maine Coast Sea Vegetables and Larch Hanson's seaweed company, and it's called American Undaria. And I was just trying to be more authentic by using Undaria. That was an invasive species in Australia and Argentina. So that's why I switched to Undaria. Seaweed, you just have to say it's good enough. I mean, there's no way of saying, this is perfect seaweed. I know where it came from, which rock. I do know that from Larch, but I would trust Larch's seaweed the most. Maine Coast Sea Vegetables the second most, and everyone else, you just got to say, well, maybe it's good enough. So.
What about the seaweeds from Japan? I mean, anything that's coming from Japan now, I'm concerned because of Fukushima.
It is definitely.
I have seaweed from Japan that I got before Fukushima happened. So I'm assuming that seaweed is okay.
This is a paper I was reading a couple of days ago, and it's about Okinawa. And there were two populations they studied, and people who go out, these centenarians that go out and collect their own seaweed from the shores of Okinawa, have higher levels of fucoidan, which is the most protective of the phytochemicals in brown seaweeds. And compared to the people who lived in the mountains who didn't collect their own seaweed. And so the conclusion of the article was, you want fresh seaweed that you collect yourself because it has the marine bacteria on it that will help you digest that seaweed. I think it's impractical to move to Okinawa, but it does suggest that fresh seaweed may be healthier. But perfection in this world is just impossible. I do know that one of the concessions that Hillary Clinton made as Secretary of State was that we do not test the seaweed we import from Japan. We don't test it for radioactivity. So in Japan, they test for radioactivity, and it's confined to areas around Fukushima. So, I mean, you could take a Geiger counter to a health food store and just measure your seaweed. I haven't done that. I think it's ripe for exploitation by unethical people who grow their seaweed and have no market in Japan. But that would be insulting to people in Japan. So I don't think a foreigner will ever find that answer. I don't know if we ever will find that answer. It's a good enough approach. I mean, I don't know.
I once met a man whose name was Good Enough. And he said, I'm not best. He said, I'm good enough. Jane, I want to thank you. You did a wonderful job. You really shone very well.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes.
Could I ask one more question?
Sure. Hold on.
Oh, yes. Jane, thank you so much. Do you have a newsletter or a blog?
Not at the moment. I've never had one. And the other thing, there was a question about the high arsenic in hijiki. We ban hijiki because of high arsenic. In theory, it's a problem. In Japan, it's not. I think the seaweed binds that arsenic and probably eliminates the arsenic. So I think they measured the wrong end of the digestive tract. They measured how much you're putting in, not how much you're excreting. I think seaweed is a great collector of toxins and carcinogens and heavy metals, but so far no one has done the study of fecal excretion of arsenic. So it's very hard to get hijiki. I think it tastes great. It's one of my favorite seaweeds, but there is a health concern, and probably soaking it in water is very important before you use it. No guarantees.
In life.
And that Irish seaweed that you mentioned, that Irish something, Irish supplement or something, ground up.
Carrageenan?
No, it was Franny Redigan is the doctor who is absolutely passionate about Irish seaweeds. And she has a blend she's put together of Irish seaweeds, red, browns, and greens. And I use that on vegetables, and it's delicious.
How do you obtain that?
I know that Franny has written an award-winning cookbook. So I don't know if she has a blog. She gave me some, so I'm not quite sure how I would buy it.
Thank you.
I know I tried to buy her cookbook here and could not. So it's a European publication.
How
Yeah.
do you spell Franny? Franny Radigan.
Prannie is her first name, and Radigan, Rhatigan, is her last name.
Thank you so much.
And she's in Galway. No, she's in Sligo, Ireland.
Oh, thank you. And where are you located, Jane?
Columbia, South Carolina.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
The gem of the ocean.
Yes, 100 miles. And it's illegal to collect seaweed in South Carolina because it's important for the critical habitat of our loggerhead turtles. So,
wow.
Yes, I don't get local seaweed here.
Oh,
No,
Thank you. This was an excellent presentation.
thank you.
I
Thank
think,
you.
in summary, I think sprinkling it on, your rice, or the sprinkle approach is good, as well as, of course, miso soup. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And from me too, Jane, thank you so much.
You're welcome.